Hi, my name's Dave Adams, and you're watching the Core Mechanic, and today we're doing number 52 on Mike Selinker's list of 100 games you absolutely, positively must know how to play. Tichu. Tichu is a trick-taking game designed by Urs Hostettler and published in 1991 by Rio Grande Games. Urs is an interesting character. He is not only a game designer, he is also a singer and songwriter, and you can see his stuff on YouTube. The game plays between 3 to 10 players. Now, although there are rules for 3 players and rules for players up to 10, that's not strictly how you would play it. The game is traditionally played by 4 people with 2 teams of 2, with each opponent to the left and right of you and your teammate across the table from you. This is essentially a team game in the style of bridge or other sort of trick-taking games of that nature. But this game just holds so much more. In fact, let's go and have a look at how the game is played and how the game is scored, because those 2 things are incredibly important for understanding why this game is so interesting. Now, traditionally in Tichu, you don't deal cards. Each player takes cards. And at this point in the game, when you take cards from the deck, before you take your 9th card, you may call Grand Tichu. And I'll explain what the Tichus do, but in terms of the setup, this is perhaps one of the first things a player can do to take a risk in the game. And so I'll come back to what the Tichus and Grand Tichus do, but at this point, before you take your 9th card, that's what you can do. You can call a Grand Tichu. Once you have your entire hand, you'll have 14 cards. Now, partners are situated directly opposite each other, so in terms of a table, there will be you, and then to your left and to your right will be your opposition, and directly opposite you will be your partner. So the same is true for every player then, so that each player at the table will have their partner directly opposite them with their opponent directly left or right. This has a great impact in terms of gameplay. Play will proceed around the table in a clockwise motion, which will impact the way that tricks are won or how you want to play the game or which tricks you release at different times. At this stage, once you have all 14 cards, you need to begin the game by pushing a card to your left, to your right, and to your partner across the table. So of course you don't want to give your opponents good cards, you want to try and give them essentially the chaff from your hand. Usually you try to give them lower end cards so that the tricks that are open to them are really only within the bottom part of their hand. In this case, you would probably try and give them something like the 3. In this case, I have a pair of 4s, a pair of 7s, a pair of 9s, a 6 and an 8. That leaves open a straight, but that straight isn't guaranteed with needing either a 5 or a 10. And so I'll probably go with the doubles rather than try and hope for a straight. So having given the 3, push the 3 to my left, I'll probably push the 6 to my right. And then I need to give my opponent, my partner something, so I'm going to try and give them a card which would benefit them. Usually you try to give them quite a powerful card. In this case, I have 2 aces, and although I don't have a straight, clear straight with the high-end cards, those high-end cards are probably going to win me a few individual tricks. So I'll push the ace across the table. Now, having distributed the cards properly with pushing up the 3, this is what the first player hand looks like, with the mahjong, meaning that they get to play the first card or the first trick, a single 6, an ace, 4 of a kind, which is called a bomb, which trumps all other trumps except higher bombs. It is the lowest possible bomb, by the way, with the straight. So the first player would be able to play the mahjong. They could make a wish for a card, which means that the first player who is able to play that card must play that card regardless of whatever card you decide, whether it's a 2 through to an ace, or they can start with any card they want. And in this case, you probably would start with the Mahjong. Now, when the person who has the lead plays their set of cards or their trick, each player must follow in that kind, but increasing the trick. So if I played this straight 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, Jack, Queen, the only thing that could really beat it is that number of cards played as a run, but with a higher run. So they could be 7, 8, 9, 10, Jack, Queen, King. Play continues around the circle with each person playing a trick higher if they are able to or if they choose to. And then if someone does play a trick that's higher, then continue plays around the circle again, giving every player an opportunity to play. So the tricks are pretty standard. If you've got a single 5, I can trump that with an ace or any card that's higher. Standard highest card wins. Of course, you've got your wild cards, which include your Phoenix, which is always half a point higher than the previous card played. It's the only one that can be played above an ace legally, except when you play the Dragon. And the Dragon is the highest of the single card. It's worth 25 points. There's a trick to it though. If you win with the Dragon, you must give the entire set to one of your opponents. The trick with the Phoenix is, while it can act as a half a point higher than any other card, its bonus is that it can be any card at once as well. So if I placed it with a 2, that would be now a pair of 2s. I could place it in a straight and have suddenly it could be any number within the straight, making up the hand of 5. The only problem is that this card is worth negative 25 points. So it becomes about balancing winning the trick with losing those points. Of course, following on from the standard trick, you've got your pairs can be beaten by higher pairs. If you lead with 3 of a kind, you can beat it with a higher 3 of a kind. And just like in poker, I can lead with a full house, but of course that can be beaten by any other full house, which is higher. But where the triplets of the card being higher is the most important point there. And of course, as would make sense, any straight can be beaten by a higher straight. Now, in terms of the bombs, any 4 cards of a kind, any 4 of a kind is a bomb. And that out-trumps most anything. But the only thing that can out-trump it, as I stated earlier, was any bomb of a higher value. So the 4 2s is the lowest, but that can be outdone by the 4 3s and so forth through to 4 of a kind for the aces. However, what outdoes that is any straight of the same suit. So 5 cards of a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in this particular instance of the same suit would trump any of the 4 of a kinds. But it doesn't have to just be the 4, it doesn't just have to be the 5 cards. I could continue that on. If I had 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that would be a higher trump again. So the overall goal of Tichu is to get to 1,000 points. And scoring is a little bit complicated in that taking a trick allows you to take points from the cards. So if you have a 5 in the trick that you take, you score 5 points. If you have a 10 in the trick, you score 10 points. If you have a king, you score 10 points. And of course, as I mentioned with the trump cards, if you get the dragon, you get 25 points, even though someone else won the trick for you. Or if you get the Phoenix, then you get minus 25 points to whatever your score is. Now, each person scores individually because that can change throughout the round. But at the end of the round, when all cards have been played, then those points move over into a group point for your team. So you get these sorts of hands where your points are going up and down, but the point system then suddenly becomes that's your points that you have scored for the game so far. Now there's a caveat to that the last player to go out, or is usually left with cards in their hands when the second last player goes out, gives all of their remaining cards to the opposing team and all of their tricks to the first person that went out, which, if that was also the opposing team, means the opposing team is going to score whatever was in your hand, and that can be quite a few points in some cases. If both players on one team go out before either of the other two players on the other team go out, then no scoring happens that round, and that team just gets a straight 200 points. Now, when I first started the rules, I mentioned the Grand Tichu and the Tichu, and this is where the sort of poker-esque gambling element comes in. If you claim a Tichu before you play, which you can claim before you play any card in your hand. So you can have all your cards, you can watch a few rounds go by, and then you can play a card. Before you play that card, you can call Tichu. That's indicating to everyone at the table that you think you're going to go out before them. And if you do, you get straight up 100 points for that, plus whatever you score. But if you don't go out and someone goes out before you after you've called Tichu, then you subtract 100 points from your team tally. So there's a bit of risk reward there. The Grand Tichu comes before you take your 9th card. Before you take your 9th card, if you call Grand Tichu, then you are claiming that you are going to go out and you are risking 200 points. If you go out, you get those 200. If you don't, then you lose those 200. And it's a risky take. Now, on top of that, as an extra bonus, if you call Grand Tichu or Tichu, and you are the first to go out, you get those 100 points. And your teammate goes out before either of the other two team members go out, before the opposing team members go out, then you score, again, that 100 points for the round and the 100 points for your Tichu or 200 points for the Grand Tichu, netting you around a maximum of 300 points. Of course, all the other cards don't score anything, including the dogs or the Hound. And the Hound is simply a card that is worth 0 points. It has 0 value, so you can't use it as part of a play as part of a straight or as part of adding on to any other trick in progress. But you play it before you play a card, and it immediately gives priority to the other player across the table from you. So essentially what you're doing is you're saying, instead of me starting the trick and leading this trick, I'm going to give leadership of this trick over to my teammate. But if your teammate has already gone out, then it goes to the next person to your teammate's left, which means naturally it goes to your opponent on your right. However, if they're out, then that immediately comes back to you. So it can be used strategically. It's very rarely the card you want to be left last with, because if someone takes the trick from you surprisingly, leaving you with the Hound, then you can't go out. You just have to sit there. So it is a risk. However, that leadership of a trick is an incredibly powerful component of the game. Now, while this game is a trick-taking game, it's what's called a hand shredder, which you see this sort of thing in games like Uno, which is one of the more classic styles of games, where the idea is to get your hand out onto the table first. It's important for scoring points, but in this particular instance, unless you do that, you can't score points, and the last person to do that gets a negative or I suppose some sort of punishment for not getting their hand out. So that really becomes a necessary part of the game, where it's not just the scoring points, it's also having to get your hand out, which then leads into a lot of the questions of whether you take the risk of taking that negative 25 points with the Phoenix, or playing your Trump Dragon and giving your opposition 25 points, versus that whole, if I don't do that, I won't get my hand out, and then I won't score points, or everything in my hand will go to my opponents anyway. So that can really lead to some of the tension of going out and doing really well to get your hand out, but then still scoring less than your opponents. And that's really disheartening if you don't really know what's going on. Now, Mike Selinker said that Tichu would be one of the best trick-taking games that you will ever play. And having played it now, I think he's probably right. And I say think, but that's probably underselling it. Since I downloaded the app for this game, I have played this game more than any other app that I've downloaded. It keeps all of my statistics on record, and I've played 147 games as of this date, and I only downloaded it a couple of months ago. I literally play hands every day, and that's just to fill in time, whether I'm just taking a brief break at the office. I'll play a couple of hands. I won't play a full game because to get to 1,000 points takes a few moments, but I will play a hand or two, and so throughout the course of the day I'll play a game, maybe two. Sometimes I'll sit down and play 3 or 4 over the course of an evening, but for the most part on my rather busy days with higher schedules, I'll still at least play a hand or two. And I'm finding that I'm loving this game the more I play it. And that's kind of surprising for a trick-taking game. If you look at a lot of reviewers, trick-taking games just don't seem to last in the industry. Tom Vassell is someone who's often made this criticism of trick-taking games that he loves and enjoys himself, but often says that they don't hang around, they don't last on the top 10 lists, they sell out really well, but then they peter off and you tend to not hear about them after a while. But this game has real staying power, and I think that's because of the way you can play the cards. And in part, it's not just that the highest card wins, it's that sometimes holding off and leading off with a trick that no one can follow makes those smaller powered cards, those 2s and 3s, equally as powerful. In fact, some of your strategy will come around the fact knowing that people are going to get rid of your 2s and 3s, and so you're more likely to get them. So although holding on to them can be a bit of a risk sometimes, it can pay off in that you tend to get more of those cards coming, so you get bombs or you get 3 of a kind. The other thing that I haven't actually covered, I think I actually left it out of my explanation, was steps, where if you have a double, a pair of 2s for instance, and you have a pair of 3s, you can put them out, and that can go on infinitely. So you could have 2s, 2 2s, 2 3s, 2 4s, 2 5s, and you can put them all out at once. And that means that if you've started the trick with that and you've put down 3 steps of a pair of 2s, pair of 3s, pair of 4s, then everybody has to beat that. And that means that they have to put down steps unless they have a bomb. And so that means that those tiny lower valued cards actually have strategic value in the game. And in so many trick-taking games, there's always those cards, the 2 or the 3, which are just so underpowered, and they don't really, they just seem to be more to fill up your hand and to add into that randomness. Whereas in this game, they can actually be a part of a meaningful strategy and can help you go out before your opponent with higher powered cards can go out. And that means that any hand has the potential to be lethal regardless of the size or the value of the cards in it. The other thing to consider is the way the game scores, and the fact that if you can get you and your partner out before your opponents, you can sweep up big amounts of points. And that gives incentive for you to really work with your partner and to really get a sense of what they're doing. This game incentivizes in all the right ways. It gives you all the motivation you need to work with your partner. It gives you all the motivation you need to hold off on cards or to play aggressively. And knowing when to do that, when to shift gears, or whether just come out straight from the start and just play hard and play big. It's got all of this in it, and it's all mixed in with this wonderful poker-esque mechanic of the Tichu and the Grand Tichu, where you can almost gamble points away. We're risking 100 points or 200 points because we think I'm going to go out first. And that really heightens the whole, this better work, this better pay off. And sometimes it just doesn't. And that's, I think, part of the brilliance of this game, is that there is no certainty, but at the same time, you're guaranteed that better play will pay off. And I think that's something that's really surprising about this game, is just the depth of play that can come out of it. I'm often still learning after playing this game daily. I'm still learning just little things that I can do to improve. It really is getting a sense of when's the right time to play, when's the right time to assert myself, when's the right time to bring out certain cards. Realizing that just having those high valued cards isn't enough. It's when you play them, how you play them. And that, I think, is such a big incentive to just really keep focused on the whole game. And it eliminates downtime because despite the fact that each turn is so quick, you're looking at the fact that each turn requires you to be completely on the ball, following and keeping track of what's going on. Now, like many trick games, it does also mean that sometimes you are just completely out of it. You just don't have the right cards in hand. But then the creative moments come where you've got this idea in your head. You're going to use this full house and then follow it up with this other full house if someone plays a card that can beat it. But then realizing that that's just not going to happen in this game, and so you break it up into three of a kind, two of a kind, or you find a run within the mix, and then you take the risk, and maybe it pays off. All of those things, all that decision making, it's so rich. I think this is why Tichu, but beyond any other trick taking game, has lasted the distance. So what does this teach me about design and game design? And I have to admit, for a long time, and even still, I feel really baffled about how to make a good trick-taking game. And when you consider that criticism of Tom Vasel, who I highly respect and think that his breadth and depth of knowledge is something that's worth listening to. But just that criticism that trick-taking games don't last, they're not as interesting, or they don't stick around. So try to find something interesting with trick-taking. And yet, as I try to look into this more, and as I try to understand trick-taking, it occurs to me that trick-taking doesn't just have to be about card games where it's about taking the highest card value. What I'm realizing is that there are more ways to do trick-taking than I was perhaps even really aware of. As I've really looked into trick taking and seen it in its different contexts, I think there is cause to question whether trick taking really is something that doesn't stick around, and perhaps it's fair to say that pure trick taking games don't, and Tichu being the exception to that rule. But I think trick taking, and I'm open to criticism on this, but I think trick-taking is far broader than just those games. When I think of games like Get Bit, and if you haven't played Get Bit, I strongly recommend it. Get Bit is still a form of trick-taking. It's simultaneous card selection. You only have cards 1 to 7 if you've got a full list of people playing. And it gets over the whole idea of card just always having the highest card to outbid opponents. By if you play 2 cards that are the same, then effectively you're skipping your turn. You're missing out. Now it's far more random. It doesn't have the depth of strategy of Tichu, but it does put trick taking into a different context, and it does provide mechanics to think through the whole trick taking element. And that's something that I think I just need more exposure to. I need to understand better. But there is a side to this where I also began to consider that trick taking could also be a major form of battle mechanics. When I think of Magic the Gathering, I started to see Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon all as a sort of variation of trick taking. And what I mean by that is, when you look at how the cards are played, and even though it's effects, it's still my card trumps your card, or if you're going to play that card, then I'm going to play a card that trumps that. In a sense, that made me realize that there's perhaps more to trick taking than what I considered previously, and the idea of trumping your opponent could be done in multiple ways. And it gives rise to the question of, well, is even Legendary Encounters and Alien Deck Builder, is that a form of trick-taking or trumping? Does it even have to be cards? Could it be tile placement? Is that a form of trick-taking? Could I be using the idea of trick-taking in forms that don't necessarily require high numbers? One good game that also mitigates the whole highest card wins is Treasure Hunter by Richard Garfield, where each part of the board, there's a blue part, a green part, and a red part, and you play cards with different powers. Now there's a maximum wins and a minimum wins. So if you've got the maximum number, which is the highest trump wins, or the higher, and you take the trick, then you get that reward. And if you're the lowest, you can get that reward. And the thing that mixes it up is that sometimes it's the lowest that is the best reward that you want to get, and the highest could be actually detrimental, or they could both be super good, or they could both be super bad. So you want to try and land in the middle and let your opponents take the highest trump and the lowest trump. So I think there are game designers who are using trick-taking mechanics but applying them in fun and interesting ways, which perhaps I just didn't see it before. I wasn't really focused on that as a trick-taking mechanic, because I've always so traditionally held on to these games like Bridge and Canaster and 500 and Tichu even as being a trick-taking game, and that's what trick-taking looks like. That whole idea of how to take a trick, I think, is something that could be explored. I think it could play into far more mechanics than just the simple card game that we've been experiencing. And Tichu is a brilliant game, and I'd love to learn more. I'm trying to understand trick-taking as a mechanic, but I think that there are perhaps implications or applications which are far more reaching than just the simple card game, and that's something I would be keen to explore. In the end, Tichu is going to be a hard game to beat when it comes to any trick-taking game, and I think for good reason. The fact that there are so many ways that I can win a trick, there are so many different options to take, there's so many different ways I can take that standard deck of cards essentially and utilize them in different ways to try and take control of the game or lead the game, I think just adds to the depth of strategy and tactics that are available, as well as providing an interest as well as surprises. When we think about how games can be surprising, it's just how that works, how players get to that end goal, how players win the game can change and can lead to greater creative insight, with players coming up with far more interesting plays just because they're provided these cards randomly, and you have to make do with what you've got. But that sometimes means that you can almost bluff or play your way through to such a point where you're coming up with really clever ways to win the game, and it feels good when you come up with those innovative ways. It feels good when you use a really bad hand and somehow turn it around to make it a good round for yourself. So I think that Tichu just provides a lot to play and hold on to. It gives you a lot to work with, and I think it's a really meaty experience. So as its own trick-taking game, I think it's fantastic, and it's one that I will be playing for a long time yet. And I would love to get my own Tichu group together. It would be brilliant. But until then, I'm going to be stuck on the app, I think, and perhaps for a while yet. However, trick-taking as a mechanic, I think, is something I'm only just really skimming the surface of here. And I think there is a lot more to be had and to be understood and to be explored with this mechanic. I think there is a great deal of depth to go on, and I'm really keen to try and find all the different ways that that trick-taking mechanic can be utilized, and to see if there's any ways in which I can push it and understand it and use it for my own benefit. But look, I think that's enough for Tichu and trick-taking mechanics for now. If you like what we're doing, please hit that like button. If you're new to this community, please hit that subscribe button. We'd love to have you as a part of our conversation. And I'd love to hear from you. What are some of your favorite trick-taking games? And can you find any trick-taking games that utilize that mechanic, but in ways that maybe we haven't considered yet, or isn't a part of the games that I've already listed? If you do, I'd love to hear from you. Please put them in the comment section below. Until next time, my name is Dave Adams, and you've been watching The Core Mechanic.